Praise the Lord. It's good to be back with you again this week, sharing the word. We just got back from actually being at a ball game as soon as church was over with. My granddaughter was finishing up a ball tournament, and we went over there. So it's been a run day. And also, I was on the phone with my cousin, her father, my first cousin's husband passed away, and we've been praying for him. And I want to remember that family. He was 87. He was blessed to live 87 years, but it's still a loss for that family. So let's do remember the family of George Pierce, and just ask God to strengthen and comfort and direct as they deal with the funeral this week. But we have been enjoying the blessings of the Lord. We thank God for all that He has done. Still many requests that's been given in. But I know God can take care of every single one of them. Still remember my sister and my brother, both still dealing with ailments. And my sister with the cancer. But God's healing. As they did their scan this week, the cancer's shrinking more. And we thank God for that. And just want to continue to be praying for churches. Not just our church, but all the churches. And when I pray for the church, I'm not talking about a building. I'm talking about a people. It's the people who are the church. And the churches are failing because people fail to come together anymore. They think that they don't have to assemble themselves, but we need each other. And I pray for the churches and the people to start having a love for God's house again and coming to the house of God. Thank God for the lesson we had today. We've been studying with our young people about some of the things that we deal with every day in life, and we went over 13 subjects already within the past several months of the do's and don'ts of things we need to tell our young people, and still more to come. We didn't even get a chance to finish today's lesson, and that's what I like about Sunday school. We start about 10:30ish. And we go to 12 doing nothing but great in-depth Bible study. Then from 12 to whenever the Lord's finished, we go into worship. And I want to share with you today a bit of the word that God had shared with me earlier this week. And it stirred my heart. And as my son was teaching, he was talking about some of the consequences that happens when we mess up. Because for some reason, as humans, we want to categorize sin. We categorize wrongdoing. Even the courts do that. When it comes to certain areas of the crime, they want to say if it's first degree, second degree. This kind of a murder was worse than another kind. Murder's murder, and man is always bad about doing the same thing when it comes to sin. They want to think there's big sins and there's little sins, but in God's eyes, it's all sin. And one of the biggest sins that a lot of times we fail, that we a lot of times do, a failure of ours, is our disobedience. Because God has given us instructions and God has given us a direction to follow in life, yet we find ourselves constantly doing our own way and trying to excuse it with the words God understands. But see, God has already directed us and given us a path to follow. You say, what is that path? Well, you haven't been reading the word if you don't know that path. And it's not nothing new. Man throughout all the time has always followed after something that he shouldn't be doing, and all that disobedience. It started in the very beginning in the garden when God told Adam and Eve, all this is yours, enjoy, but just don't touch that one tree. The only thing he told them not to do is don't touch that tree. Everything else is fine. But because you told them that one thing of don't do, what did they do? And we're the same way. I don't know how many times as I was brought up, my dad would sometimes give instructions, don't be going here, don't be doing this. And as soon as we could, what did we do? We're bad creatures of habit when it comes to disobedience. And we do the same with God. When it comes to direction, we don't want to follow direction. And a story that I want to share with you is from the book of Genesis in the 12th chapter. And this is now the call on Abraham's life. He was first known as Abram. And God made a call on his life. And we know Abraham. All the countries over there in the Middle East all are descendants of Abraham, and they all feel that they are entitled to the blessings of Abraham. But God had made a special direction in Abraham's life for a promise to him that how he would bless him, give him a special country, a land, and multiply his seed as the sands by the sea and the stars in the sky. But yet there's still that area, as always, disobedience. And it started from the very beginning of the call of Abraham. You say, wait a minute, I know he made mistakes later and all that. What do you mean at the very beginning? Listen to the words. In the 12th chapter, first verse, now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country and from your family and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you. And I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Don't that sound wonderful? I mean, I remember as a kid singing that song and all that. Father Abraham has many sons. And realize we're one of them. Because the blessings promised through Abraham. That you and I are still blessed and all that today. But remember what God told him. This is the New King James Version. In the Old King James Version, it says, get out of this country, leave your kinfolks, and leave your father's house. Listen to this fourth verse, though. Remember, God told him three things to do. Get out of this country, leave your kinfolks, and get out of your father's house. Leave your father and your mama. So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Leave this country, leave your kinfolks, in other words, your family, and your father's house, and go and I will bless. He leaves the country, leaves his father's house, but here comes kinfolks tagging along. And you talking about the headaches that ensued. You go to the next chapter and you find that there, you got to remember, and Abraham was 75 years old. And as Abraham leaves, now you remember he's kind of a businessman. He's got livestock and it's his business. So as he leaves, he said, now you got to leave your family, your father and everything. And probably a lot of that built up from being under his dad's house. But now, as his own businessman, his own corporation of sorts, Abraham and his wife leave. She most likely, we know that she has handmaids. He has people that work for him. And so here he goes with his workers. Now Lot follows. Lot's his nephew. And Lot follows him too. He says, I'll go with you. And he brings his family and his business along. So now you got two families and two different companies trying to walk the same path. And God said, get away from the families, from the kinfolk. And then we find that in the 13th chapter that it come to an area that both of them was growing, was being blessed, because, of course, Lot realized, hey, I'm hanging out with Abraham, and, man, it's just blessings are pouring out. My business is multiplying. But his workers and Abraham's workers are constantly fighting with each other. And Abraham realized, what a headache have we gotten into. So he calls his nephew aside and he says, listen, we need to not be fighting with each other. So tell you what, look about all this land. If you want all this that's on the right, you go that way and I go left. If you want all that's on the left, you go that way and I go right. But right now, we cannot go together. If you just listen to God in the first place, this wouldn't have happened. Yet, it did because of disobedience. And there's consequences when it comes to disobedience. We find, of course, Lot, he looks over here and he says, all this land looks so much nicer and greener and everything. Of course, he's going to take the better of the two. And he goes that way. Well, you order. Abraham wasn't worried because God made a promise. I will bless you. And even though the land he went to didn't seem to be as prosperous, God blessed Abraham. Abraham still continued to grow and prosper. We find, though, in Lot's case, where he went here, where it looked like it was green pastures, winds up, we know the story later on, that Lot winds up in Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot winds up in an area, probably one of the worst areas of town. And so I'm taking it, okay, does not mention anything about his business anymore. Doesn't mention anybody about his herdsmen or anything like that. So I'm taking it where Lot thought that he was choosing the better area. Lot was only blessed when he was with Abraham. I think he lost his business. He wound up having to move to town, to one of the worst parts of town, in one of the worst cities ever, Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where God realized it was full of sin. And he tells Abraham, you need to go down and tell your nephew. And he only did that because of his love for Abraham. Get him out. Tell him you got to leave. I'm going to destroy the city. Abraham sat there and he said, well, surely there's got to be at least 100 good people there. And God said, well, if you go find 100, I'll spare it. See, God knew. Abraham realized and all that, maybe if we find even 50, if you find 50, I'll spare it. He keeps coming on down to even it come down and he said, how about if you just find 10? Would you spare the city if we could find 10 that are righteous? But God knew. That's how bad Sodom and Gomorrah had gotten. And I don't doubt that Lot and his family had gotten mixed up in the corruption too. But God told them to leave. In fact, when he told them to leave, we know the story. Leave and don't look back. But Lot's wife hung up with all that she was leaving behind, turned, looked back, and turned into a pillar of salt. And then it even goes on worse within Lot's life. As he sits there and his daughters sit there and think that, no man would have us. They get their father, Lot, drunk and didn't have children by their own father, which became two tribes that was always against the nation of Israel too, Ammon and Moab, which become the Ammonites and the Moabites. You say, oh, we've heard of them in the Bible. Oh, yeah. And all because of the disobedience. And remember, there's consequences to disobedience. God has given so many of us instructions to follow in life, and yet when we do our way, why do we get surprised when things don't work out right? Why are we so surprised when all of a sudden it comes up that something takes place and then we're sitting there going, why did this happen? Well, you got off course. You become disobedient. And as my son was sharing today, where he'd gotten a traffic ticket for running slowly through a stop sign. And there's consequences for disobedience. The sign says stop. You obey the stop sign. He went through a rolling stop, as we call it, went right on through. And the funny thing he said before he went through, he sees the cop and waved at him. And yet still, there was consequences for your disobedience. And of course, had to pay the ticket, got pulled over with the ticket. In his mind, he thought, it's going to be okay. There's consequences for disobedience. Throughout our life, we need to remember that when we disobey God, when God has given us instruction. There's maybe a time that God has said, turn the TV off and pray. And we use the excuse, wait a minute, Lord. And I got news for you. God ain't going to ask you 2 or 3 times. He asked you once. If you don't move when he first asked and he sit there and he's putting his mind, fine, you don't want to be blessed. Because I find that he's given us 2 areas to go in life. It's the right way or the wrong way. He said, if you listen to my instructions, are obedient to what I tell you, you shall be blessed. But if you're disobedient to my instructions, you shall be cursed. Your choice. Blessings, cursings. It's your choice. And every day we wonder why this has happened to me. Well, ask yourself, have you been obedient? Have you listened to the voice of God? Have you followed his direction of which way you should go? Again, it's so simple. Obedience brings blessings. Disobedience brings consequences, as the Bible even says, curses. I don't know about you, but I want to be blessed. And to be blessed, it means I've got to be obedient and follow after the direction of God. In doing so, I must be willing to, even though it might rub against my flesh, and even though I might not understand why, and I can understand on Abram's part, he's sitting there thinking, well, it's just Lot, it's just my nephew. And he was a good help when he was a young kid. And when he was a young kid and all that, he hung around my house, and he's like a son to me because I ain't had children yet. But see, God said, leave your kinsmen. Because God knew. In fact, sometimes he's reminding us, sometimes the very people that you think is all right, and that includes family, can bring you down. I hate to say it. I mean, I got all my family I love, but I also know that some of my family can pull me down. Some of my family can put me in worse shape if I allow them to mingle too much in my life. Yes, some of my family has helped, but then there's some of my family that are not following God or disobedient to God, and because of that, I can't mingle myself with them. I have to have a separating. If they want to be in the world, I can't be of the world. And yes, it's hard and all that. You know, I'm the type, I was brought up the same way with my dad, that if my children sinned after they was grown up, they're welcomed in my house, but if they sin, they can't come in. In other words, if they's out drinking, you think I'm going to let them bring their alcohol in my house? No. They know that not to do that too. They know, as the saying in my house is like what Joshua said. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. I remember telling my son one time when he went to bring in a CD, and I looked at it and it said, mature audience only and all that, vulgar language. I said, get that out of my house. It's hard when you have to sit there and do that separating with family. But then you want your blessings? Be obedient. Through obedience. The time when the children of Israel and Saul was leading them, and he said, go in and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Don't leave nothing breathing alive. Yet they get there and they sit there and they see their cattle, figure it's bigger than ours, we'll bring them back for sacrifices. Their women, we can use their women, we can bring their children, they didn't do nothing wrong, let's just kill the men. But God said, utterly strike them down. And they did do it. And he had to sit there and tell them these words. When all of a sudden they come back and Samuel says, what's that noise I hear? He heard the cattle and all that, the sheep bleeping. And he sit there and he goes, tried to give an excuse. And these words come forth. Boy, you did not obey God. Obedience is better than sacrifice. What you thought was all right, it's not what God told you to do. Obedience is better than sacrifice because of your rebellion. And he said that rebellion is a form of witchcraft. Because of that, you're going to wind up suffering for this. Maybe not now, but your children's children, your grandchildren are going to suffer because these that you did not slay will come back one day and bring a problem against you. Because I told you it had to be a separating. It might seem not that makes sense to you, but there's a reason. You don't understand, but there's always a reason. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Disobedience, always a consequence. God bless you. Thank you for the time we shared today, and we're looking forward to coming back with you again next week. Hopefully it won't be another rushed Sunday as I've had the past couple Sundays, because I enjoy more sitting from my office at church or even from the pulpit and sharing with you, where I can also share a song. But I do thank you for your time. Hope that I said something that touched your heart and soul today. Remember, there's consequences to disobedience. Listen to the voice of God. Let him have his way. Till next week.